Kentucky, 1847. The Millbrook Inn sat along a quiet stretch of road that carried weary travelers from one frontier town to another. On the surface it was a haven, a warm hearth, soft beds, and the kind welcome of the Cunningham sisters, Martha and Eliza. To those passing through, it felt like salvation. Two women, offering love, kindness, and a safe place to rest. But Millbrook Inn hid something darker beneath its floorboards. For behind every smile, every gentle touch of hospitality, there were whispers, travelers who never made it to their destinations. Wagons found abandoned on the road, families that passed through Millbrook only to vanish from the records. And in the orchard behind the inn, 43 shallow mounds waited in silence. The sisters claimed they offered comfort, but in truth, they offered something else entirely. A final bed, a poisoned cup, a kiss of death that led to the earth itself. At first, the Millbrook Inn was seen as a blessing. The road it sat upon was long and treacherous, and travelers often arrived with blistered feet, hungry bellies, and empty spirits. The Cunningham sisters greeted them with warm food, soft voices, and smiles that promised safety. Martha, the elder, was known for her charm. Eliza, the younger, was gentler, with eyes that seemed to carry secrets. Together they gave the weary something rare on the road, comfort. But slowly, the comfort began to rot. The first disappearances weren't spoken of loudly. A trapper who had passed through never reached his next trading post. A salesman with a wagon full of goods was last seen checking into the inn, but was never heard from again. Stagecoach passengers occasionally vanished without explanation, their belongings found neatly stacked in their rooms. When people asked the sisters about these missing guests, they always had an answer. The trapper, he left before dawn. The salesman, he settled a bill and rode out after supper. The passengers, they changed their minds, turned south instead of north. Martha spoke with such conviction that townsfolk believed her. Eliza's soft reassurances silenced doubt. Still, questions lingered. Merchants who stopped at the inn sometimes noted how well stocked the sisters seemed. Their pantry never emptied. Their larder overflowed with salted meats, pickled vegetables, and fine whiskey. Yet the sisters rarely traveled to town for supplies. How then did they manage such abundance? Then there was the matter of valuables. A man named Jonathan Wells, a gambler who often boasted of his winnings, was last seen staying at Millbrook. Weeks later, his horse was found tied behind the inn, but Jonathan himself had vanished. Martha explained that he had gone walking into the woods and never returned. But his gold pocket watch, recognized by a dealer in Lexington, somehow ended up for sale in a pawn shop weeks later. The dealer swore he'd bought it from a woman with dark hair and sharp eyes, Martha Cunningham. The inn's reputation began to change. People whispered that it was unlucky, that those who stayed too long risked never leaving. Some said the sisters seduced men, offering them love, only to rob them and send them to shallow graves. Others insisted poison was the weapon, wine laced with something bitter stew that carried a strange aftertaste. One story told of a preacher who had stopped for a night of rest. He later described a supper of roast meat and wine, and how Eliza's eyes never left his face as he ate. By midnight, he was vomiting blood, writhing on the inn's wooden floor. He claimed Martha stood over him, calm and cold, whispering prayers that didn't sound like prayers at all. He lived only because another traveler broke into the inn that night and dragged him into the cold air, forcing water down his throat until the poison passed. When he awoke, he swore never to set foot in Millbrook again. Still, the sisters smiled. Still, they welcomed strangers. And still, bodies failed to appear. It was autumn when the first grave was discovered. A farmer searching for a lost pig near the inn stumbled upon a patch of disturbed earth beneath the orchard trees. Curiosity drove him to dig. What he unearthed was a skull, its jaw broken, its teeth clenched as if in death throes. The farmer covered it back quickly and fled. When asked about it later, He denied the story, but others said they saw the fear in his eyes. Soon after, more graves were whispered of. Travelers swore they saw shapes in the orchard at night, 2 women with shovels, dragging something heavy through the dirt. Dogs barked at the orchard, but never went near it. And when storms came, heavy rain sometimes exposed glimpses of bone. By the winter of 1847, rumors had turned to near certainty. People whispered of not 1 grave, not 5, but dozens, 43, some said, each one holding the remains of a soul who thought they had found shelter at Millbrook Inn. The townsfolk faced a problem. There was no proof strong enough to bring the sisters before a judge. The inn still welcomed guests, and some left unharmed. What if the stories were nothing more than superstition? What if accusing 2 women of such horror only brought shame upon the town? And so fear kept the truth buried, just as the sisters kept their guests. By early 1848, the legend of the Cunningham sisters had grown into something no one could ignore. Too many wagons abandoned, too many men gone missing, too many shallow mounds in the orchard. Still, the Millbrook Inn glowed warm at night, lanterns in the windows and smoke rising from the chimney, as though nothing was amiss. Travelers who survived their stay carried stories that spread from Kentucky into neighboring states. They told of strange meals, of stew that left the tongue numb, of wine with a bitter undertone. They described how Martha's charm could disarm the most guarded man, and how Eliza's gaze seemed to strip the soul bare. The sisters knew how to read their guests, how to draw out secrets, how to make a man lower his guard. It was said that some men were offered more than food and a bed, that love itself was promised, a tenderness that masked something fatal. The disappearances escalated. A surveyor traveling with documents for a new railway vanished after staying at the inn. A group of 3 traders was last seen there, their wagon later discovered in the woods burned with no trace of the men themselves. A widow and her teenage son, en route to join family in Tennessee, disappeared after being welcomed into Millbrook. 43 graves became the whispered number, though no one dared to count them. By now the town of Millbrook was split between fear and fury. Some argued the sisters had bewitched men, using charms or poisons learned from old folk magic. Others believed they were nothing more than killers, hiding their crimes behind the mask of hospitality. But no matter what people believed, the truth was undeniable. Millbrook Inn was not a place of safety. It was a trap. The breaking point came with the disappearance of Samuel Green, a well-known horse breeder from Lexington. Green was wealthy, respected, and not the kind of man to vanish quietly. His family demanded answers. When word spread that his last known stop had been Millbrook Inn, suspicion turned into outrage. The town could no longer pretend not to see. A meeting was called in the church, lanterns burning long into the night, as townsfolk debated what to do. Some feared confronting the sisters directly. What if they were armed? What if they were protected by something darker than rifles and knives? But others argued that if nothing was done, more travelers would die, and the name of Millbrook itself would be damned. It was decided the sheriff and a group of townsmen would ride to the inn, not to arrest, not yet. There was no judge within days' travel, but to search, to see with their own eyes whether the rumors were true. They went at dawn, 12 men on horseback, rifles slung over their shoulders. The inn was quiet when they arrived, the morning mist curling around its roof. Martha answered the door in her apron, smiling as if she had been expecting them. Eliza stood behind her, pale, her hands clasped tightly. The sheriff announced their purpose. They were there to search the grounds. Martha's smile faltered only slightly. She stepped aside and told them to do what they felt they must. The men split into groups, moving through the house and out into the orchard. Inside, the inn looked ordinary enough. Beds neatly made, a fire smoldering in the hearth, food simmering in the kitchen. But in the cellar, barrels were found filled with salted meat. Too much meat, and some of it, the butcher among them swore, did not look like pork or beef. In the orchard, the men found what they had feared. Freshly turned earth, the edges of bone jutting through, The sheriff ordered the men to dig. Within an hour they unearthed their first body, a man's skeleton, jaw broken, wrists bound. Within another hour they uncovered 2 more, a woman and a child. By dusk they had uncovered 7. The orchard was not an orchard, it was a graveyard. The men dragged Martha and Eliza outside, demanding answers. Martha denied everything. She swore the graves were ancient, that the land had once been a burial ground. Eliza wept, begging the men to stop digging, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. The townsfolk had seen enough. That night, the sisters were locked in the church while the men decided their fate. Some called for a hanging, others argued they must be taken to Lexington to face trial. But in the tavern, voices rose, fueled by whiskey and rage. By morning the sisters would learn whether they lived or died. The legend says they smiled through it all, that Martha laughed when the sheriff read the accusations, and that Eliza whispered, "They all wanted love, we only gave it." The orchard still held its secrets. Dozens of mounds remained untouched. The men had dug only 7 graves before night fell, but everyone knew the number was higher, 43. That night, the church where Martha and Eliza Cunningham were held was lit only by a few lanterns. The sisters sat quietly on a wooden bench, their hands bound with rope, their faces pale but strangely calm. Outside, the entire town seemed to gather, farmers, tradesmen, wives, even children clutching their mothers' skirts. Fear had brought them here, but anger kept them waiting. The sheriff tried to keep order, but whispers grew into shouts. Some wanted trial in Lexington, others wanted justice now. 43 graves, one man cried. How many more before someone stops them? The orchard, freshly dug with its grim discoveries, weighed heavily on everyone's minds. The smell of disturbed earth still clung to their clothes. They had seen bones, they had seen truth. Inside, Martha remained unflinching. When asked why so many travelers had vanished on her property, she tilted her head and smiled. "Men come and go," she said softly. "It is the way of the world." Eliza, trembling, muttered prayers under her breath, though some swore her words didn't sound like prayers at all, but something older, stranger. As the night dragged on, the tavern filled with fury. Men pounded tables, whiskey spilling as they shouted for a hanging. "The orchard is proof enough," they argued. "Why waste a trial?" Others feared rushing judgment. What if outsiders saw Millbrook as lawless? But the louder voices drowned the cautious ones. Justice or vengeance was demanded before dawn. By morning the sheriff gave in. The crowd was too many, the anger too great. The sisters would hang. They were led from the church to the large oak tree that stood near the crossroads, where the road split toward Lexington and Tennessee. Ropes had already been thrown over a heavy branch. The crowd was silent now, grim and tense. Some crossed themselves, others spat at the ground. Children hid their faces. Martha walked with dignity, her back straight, her eyes scanning the crowd as though memorizing each face. Eliza stumbled, weeping, begging for mercy, her words a tangle of denial and confession. "We only gave them what they asked for," she sobbed. "They came lonely, they came hungry, they wanted love. We only gave love." The sheriff read the charges, his voice steady despite the quiver in his hands. Murder of travelers, concealment of bodies, 43 graves. He asked if the sisters had final words. Martha's lips curled into a smile. "You'll never prove 43, she whispered. "Some graves hold more than you can count." Eliza screamed as the nooses were tightened. Some said she called on God, others swore she called on something else. Her words were garbled, almost in tongues, a chant that made even the bravest man in the crowd shiver. The trap doors were kicked, their bodies fell. Eliza thrashed, choking, until stillness took her. Martha swung without a sound, her eyes fixed open, as if still staring into the crowd. When it was done, silence hung heavy. The bodies were cut down and buried in unmarked graves beyond the churchyard. The inn was shuttered, its doors nailed closed, its windows smashed. The orchard was left to grow wild, the graves untouched. No one wanted to dig further. In time, Millbrook Inn collapsed into ruin. Travelers avoided the crossroads, Families warned their children never to go near the orchard, but the story spread, whispered from town to town. 2 sisters who offered love to strangers, 43 graves hidden behind their inn, and with each telling, the number grew. Some said more than 50, some said hundreds, some claimed the sisters' spirits still wandered the road, beckoning travelers to follow them into the orchard. The Millbrook Inn was gone, but the legend remained, a reminder that hospitality can hide horror, and that love in the wrong hands can become the deadliest trap of all. The hanging of Martha and Eliza Cunningham should have ended the matter. Justice was swift, their inn was boarded up, and their orchard left to the weeds. But the story didn't die with them. If anything, it only grew darker. For years, travelers passing through the Crossroads spoke of strange sights near the ruins of the Millbrook Inn. Some claimed to see lantern light flickering in the windows, though the house had long collapsed. Others said they heard women's laughter drifting from the orchard, high and soft, as though carried on the wind. A few swore they were stopped on the road by 2 women in shawls, offering a warm bed and supper, their voices gentle, their smiles inviting. When travelers refused, the women vanished into the night air. The orchard itself became the center of the legend. 43 graves, they said, but no one ever dug them all. The first 7 unearthed had been enough to damn the sisters, but beneath the rest of the mounds, who knew what waited? Bones, treasures, secrets too dark to tell. Some boys dared each other to creep into the orchard at night. Some never returned, their bodies later found in the brambles, pale and cold, as if drained of life. Parents told their children that the ground was cursed, that anyone who stepped on the fair sisters' graves would never wake from their dreams. By the 1860s, the story had spread beyond Kentucky. Newspapers picked it up, framing it as both cautionary tale and grotesque entertainment. The Sisters of Millbrook became a name that stirred both fear and fascination. Some articles painted them as simple killers, women who robbed and poisoned travelers. Others suggested something darker, that their love was a ritual, a pact with forces beyond the human. Each body in the orchard an offering. Folklorists visiting the region collected versions of the story that varied wildly. In some, the sisters lured only men, jealous of their power and wealth. In others, they took entire families, claiming that love must be shared by all or none. In still others, the orchard itself was said to consume the bodies, roots twisting around skeletons to drink their blood. Yet through all the variations, one detail never changed. 43 graves, always 43, but the truth remained elusive. Was the number real, or had it grown with each retelling? Some historians later argued that only a handful of bodies were ever found, that the rest was rumor layered on rumor. Others insisted townsfolk had covered up the true number to protect Millbrook from eternal shame. Even the official records were murky, pages missing from the sheriff's logs, church notes erased, names of the dead left unrecorded. It was as though the earth itself had swallowed the evidence, leaving only bones in unmarked mounds. The inn's land eventually changed hands. New owners tried to clear the orchard, but their work never lasted. Fences rotted, crops failed, livestock sickened. More than one farmer abandoned the property, muttering that the sisters still walked at night. Eventually no one tried again. The land was left to wilderness, the inn's foundations swallowed by vines, the orchard by thorns. Yet the story remained. Parents in Kentucky told their children that if a stranger offered love too easily, beware, it might be the fair sisters returned from the grave. Campfire tales warned travelers never to stop at lonely inns along forgotten roads, and to this day locals claim that on foggy nights, if you stand near the old Millbrook Crossroads, you can hear shovels striking dirt, as if someone is still digging, still burying, still hiding what cannot be found. The Millbrook Inn is long gone, but its legend remains, a reminder that sometimes the kindest smile hides the deadliest secret, and that love, when twisted, can leave nothing behind but graves. The Cunningham sisters promised warmth, promised comfort, promised love, and in a way they delivered it, just not the kind anyone wanted. 43 graves remain their legacy,
43 lives cut short by the women who welcomed them in. And if you ever find yourself walking through Kentucky, near the ruins of an orchard long reclaimed by the earth, remember this: count the mounds. If there are 43, you are standing in the shadow of the Millbrook Inn, and if there are more, best to turn and leave. Some secrets don't want to be known. By the Civil War, Millbrook was gone, burned and abandoned, but the Cunningham sisters lived on in rumor. Soldiers passing through wrote of an inn of death, where ghostly women lured deserters and travelers into the woods. Some Confederate troops claimed to find skeletons half buried in the orchard, their uniforms rotting off their bones. Folklore twisted the tale further. In some versions, the sisters had made a pact with the devil, each grave a tithe for eternal youth. In others, they were witches, burying hearts beneath the trees to make the orchard grow strong. Children were told that if they played too close, the sisters would dig a 44th grave just for them. Yet some skeptics insisted it was all exaggeration. They argued only a handful of bodies were found, and the 43 graves was a number born of gossip. But even the skeptics refused to camp near the orchard. It was one thing to doubt the tale, it was another to test it. Even into the 20th century, people swore the orchard was haunted. Travelers told of phantom lanterns leading them off the road, only to vanish near the inn's ruins. A few claimed to see two women standing side by side in the moonlight, beckoning with open arms. Excavations were attempted in the 1930s, when historians tried to verify the legend. They dug in the orchard, but their work ended abruptly. Reports said tools went missing, men grew violently ill, and one worker disappeared overnight, his bedroll left untouched. Only 3 skeletons were recovered before the dig was abandoned. Today the Millbrook Inn is gone. The orchard is little more than a tangle of wild trees and broken stone, but the number remains 43, always 43. Locals say the sisters still walk the road, offering weary travelers food, comfort and love, and if you accept, you'll join the others in the orchard. The Cunningham sisters gave the world a legacy carved into soil and bone, hospitality twisted into horror, love that led only to the grave. 43 graves, 43 secrets, and maybe even now one more waiting to be filled.